new realities, new connections.
The second annual Africa Global Business Forum held recently in Dubai for 2 days showcased how it is essential for companies and countries to work to find the right partners and invest in the African continent. More than 1,000 delegates from 62 countries attend the sessions during the 2-day forum, and more than 120 local and international media entities covered the event. Investors are requested, flagging the responsibility to do more to set a foundation of social development in Africa, to always considering the added value for the country where they do business. Dubai Chamber has recognized to increase its footprint in Africa and connect local businesses in Dubai with those across the continent. CNN anchor Becky Anderson has moderated the panel.
Let me introduce my esteemed panel. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda, and His Excellency Mr. Mulatu Tesomi Vietu, President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Some $30 billion of infrastructure funding at current prices over the past decade. That amounts to between 7 and 10% of inflows. Yours is one of the countries that has seen less Gulf investment than others. How would you, very briefly, assess the opportunities and threats to Ethiopia and to the wider continent?
Thank you very much. For Africa in general and for Ethiopia as well, what really we need for the continent is to develop peace and stability. That's the foundation of the economic and social development. So we need peace and stability on the continent, in each African country. We need democracy and good governance. And then the sustainable economic development follows these pillars. In the absence of the democratization of the society, we cannot anticipate any economic development, especially sustainable economic development. And the three pillars, we say, democracy and good governance, peace and stability, and sustainable economic development. Once we have this in place, then we can have the vision of integrating into the world economy. For Ethiopia, in the last 10 consecutive years, we have registered a double-digit economic growth. To be precise, it is 11.2% of GDP growth we have registered. This because we have had peace and stability in Ethiopia, which was not there before. We tried to democratize our society by backing it up with good governance, rule of law, and sustainable economic development just follow. This is a reality. This is a test by our own self. And
one of the conclusions that investment strategists have made in assessing trade flows, for example, between this region and Africa, and President of Ghana, perhaps you can address this first, and sub-Saharan Africa, is that investors oftentimes lack information. That there's a sense that Africa can be sort of lumped in together, and that people don't understand it. Perhaps less so from the BRIC countries, who've made significant investments over the years in and across the African continent. But what is your message to potential investors here who with respect, may see less of the individual countries and more of sort of continent-wide issues? And let's face it, many of those issues are the same. But how do you differentiate, make sure that people understand?
And I think that it's important for us to let investors in the world focus on continent-wide issues, because it's in Africa's interest to grow our businesses across our natural our political borders. One of the major hindrances to Africa's growth is the low level of trade amongst ourselves. Our trade patterns are still connected with the colonial traditions that we inherited. And so in Ghana, we're exporting more into Europe than we export to other parts of the world. And I believe that at 11% trade amongst ourselves, I mean, that's shamefully low. And so it's good to have a bigger picture of the continent. But I do believe also that increasingly there's more information on the continent. Before, I mean, with the perceptions of the dark continent, nothing positive came out of there. The only news that came out of Africa was conflict, famine, and so on and so forth. I mean, that has changed dramatically. I mean, people see the new opportunities that exist, and all the major networks carry major problems about major programs about Africa and what's going on there. CNN, your station, carries phenomenal, airtime in respect of the success stories in Africa, African voices, and all that. And I think that increasingly more information on Africa is going out and what the opportunities there are. But I just wanted to add quickly, the potential for Africa continuing to sustain investments is that investments look for low-cost areas to do business. And with China becoming, what it's becoming, wages and compensations in China are going up. And so for some industries like light industry, and Ethiopia is doing that very well, attracting textiles, garments, and light industry into Ethiopia. And I think that a lot of African countries should be doing the same, attracting higher value, light industry and other manufacturing in order to be able to create jobs for what is the fastest growing population in the world.
There's no doubt that the spend on infrastructure has been absolutely transformative over the past couple of decades. President of Rwanda, what have you learned from the foreign direct investment, specifically, for example, from the BRIC countries, that has benefited your country and has perhaps not helped your country? And what might you take out of the investment over the past 2 decades, for example, as an opportunity going forward?
I think building on what President Mahama of Ghana has just said, let's face it, African economies are small if you look at each country on its own. It doesn't matter even for some of those which are known to be large enough, they are not big enough when it comes to a point where they stand alone rather than being together with others. So that's the first point. Integration, therefore, is very key. And even in terms of realizing some of the objectives, for example, in terms of infrastructure generally to connect Africa, which should be the case, because we realize that each country standing on its own, you don't go far. But together, we would just make the kind of movement forward that we all want. And that's why, even in terms of investments, the investors from outside are looking at scale. Where they're going to make investments, they are looking at the size of the market. There's no doubt about it. So integration, like we have had in the East African region, where you have Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, bringing together 135 million people, you stand a chance, a better chance, looking at it this way than if you disaggregated and looked at each country standing on its own. And some of the investments also that are to be made, say, in terms of infrastructure, whether it is railways or pipelines or energy and so on, the amount of investments to be made are huge, to the point that it is easier when countries pool their resources and also attract investments, in a sense that the investors will be looking at this large population rather than one single individual country. And that's how we have think that these are lessons that have been learned over the years.
You're certainly nodding your head, President of Ghana. And sir, does that resonate with you?
Well, again, the important thing is that in order to attract foreign direct investment, we have to ask what comparative advantages the country possesses and the competitiveness in which industry we might be better off. In Ethiopia, if you take the Ethiopian example, we have assessed areas where Ethiopia has a comparative advantage to develop its economy. Of course, when we talk about the structural transformation of the economy, it is to say that we have to transform from low productivity, that's agriculture, to high productivity economies. So we are trying to transform from agriculture to industry. And we are focusing on light industry because we possess a very good advantage in jumping into the light manufacturing industry. Ethiopia is known as an agricultural country. Our backbone of the economy is agriculture, and it is very easy to transform the agricultural commodities into first to agro-processing. We have maybe the largest livestock population in Africa. So we take this as an example. We take the food processing in the meat sector, as well as the leather and leather products industry development. And I think that is an area where we have to identify which areas, like textile, is easy to develop in Ethiopia because we have plenty of land which is suitable for cotton cultivation. And it is easy also to vertically integrate the development of the textile industry and garment.
Go on.
I just wanted to say something about the question you asked about financing in infrastructure from BRIC countries. It's been critical and very useful. When traditional sources of investment dried up in infrastructure, the rise of China, India, and the Middle East, UAE, and others became an alternative source for attracting investment in infrastructure in Africa. And so some of the key infrastructure, highways, power plants, just name it, so many of them have been secured from BRIC countries. Of course, they have an interest in doing it because we use Exim financing, so it's like export credit. And so it helps the business of the country. But at the same time, it puts in the infrastructure and creates the environment that is conducive for us to attract additional investment. So in my country, the third hydropower dam that we built, 400 megawatts, was built with financing from China. We are just opening a new gas processing plant, which was built with financing from China Development Bank. We have a thermal plant, which was built by financing from Abu Dhabi and the developed countries.
So what are you doing to actively fight corruption, to create a better governance environment, to create better transparency?
Yeah, we have a government institution which is called the Anti-Corruption Commission, and that is the government arm which really is fighting and making the society more transparent, especially the bureaucracy, which is basically being suspected as a cause for corruption. So we have this government institution in place. We also have inculcated the whole population to be not silent in the fight against corruption. So we have got rules and regulations in place against corruption. Maybe Ethiopia is, I could say, if not the only country, but one of the countries who put its prime ministers in jail for corruption. That means we already have created a system which is not sympathetic with corruption. When it comes to transparency, the Ethiopian investment law, the investment regulations, it is open to the foreign investor, to the local investor as well, to the whole business community. Everybody, the government knows its obligation, and the investor knows its rights and obligations also. So whoever is corrupting the system, be it from the private sector or the government side, we are intolerant for that.
Enough being done?
Yeah, Becky, without being country-specific, I want to say that issues of accountability and transparency are much, much better in Africa today than they were in the past. The fact that more African countries are going for elections, more African countries have freedom of expression, more African countries have strong civil society organizations that are willing to speak up when they see, impropriety. It's creating a situation where, you find more transparency and accountability than we had in the past.
But let me clarify one thing here. It's also important. It's one thing to have institutions that are aimed at delivering this. It's another to allow them to work in order for the good results to happen. So the two have to be there. You have to have the institutions and the mechanisms that are supposed to deliver this, but you also have to have governance structures in place, to allow them to work, and therefore you get results, there's no doubt about it.
Let me give you all, with just about 5 or so minutes to go, an opportunity to give some sort of concluding comments on, and I'll use this white paper that The Economist has just produced, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and I do encourage you all to get access to that through your iPads. Risk and Reward, the Gulf's Push into Africa. And as I said, pointing out over the last decade, the majority of African economies have achieved robust growth, yet the continent, this paper certainly pointing out, finds itself at a crossroads. I know that you've made some very substantive points about where the continent and your own countries go next. As you, sir, give us sort of a minute's worth of concluding comments, if you will. If one of the organisers, I know that we've got questions coming from the audience, my iPad isn't working here, or I'm not doing
I just want to conclude by adding to what President Kagame said right at the beginning. He said that where Africa faces some of its biggest challenges are where there are opportunities. And of course, infrastructure is one of Africa's biggest challenges. And so that's where there's opportunity for investment. The current system we're all looking to is public-private partnerships. In the past, as president and as government, would have had to raise all the investment to build the ports, to do the electricity, to do the telecommunication system, to do the roads and all that. Today, increasingly, if you create the right environment, the private sector will come in and will take responsibility for that. And so public-private partnerships are the way to go. We've done it in telecommunications. Just by deregulating telecoms, we've had the private sector invest massive amounts of money in telecommunications. We can do that for energy, we can do that for transport, we can do that even in education. You can have the private sector setting up schools and providing a quality education. And so creating an enabling environment and giving space to the private sector to participate in infrastructure development is the way forward.
Question for you, President Kagame. With East Africa now seen as the new frontier for oil and gas, what's the collective view of East African governments in efficiently exploiting the resource and using the proceeds for the benefit of East African people? And apologies for not giving you your concluding comments, because I think now it's important that we address some of these questions.
Yes, in the conclusion, very briefly, one, I have to state that Africa's transformation is possible. And we've got to fix a number of things. One, good governance, we've got to fix infrastructure, we've got to fix skills and knowledge-based investments, and we have to make sure that the connections between African countries and therefore increased intra-trade and investments can happen. I think with this, there is no doubt, but that particular question you've raised falls in the first category where we have to fix governance. When you are governing for people and for people's transformation, then you make sure that the resources of the country are managed to the extent that they benefit the very people you have in mind. So, and I think this is happening. We don't take anything for granted. We have.
I'm just going to give you an opportunity, sir, to make a very brief sort of concluding comment, but if you could also include the issue that many people will see, which is that of civil strife, for example, across the continent, something that will be worrying investors and those who are looking for an opportunity to see a risk rather than reward will look to civil strife in various countries and say, this is a concern.
Absolutely. The civil strife is not what we need in Africa. And when I said something about peace and stability, I think the need for any country in Africa, any country in the world for that matter, to have a stable and peaceful society is to avoid civil strife. And in order to avoid that civil strife, you need to have a democracy and transparent society in place. So the civil strikes we have here and there in Africa, it is arresting the development of these countries. The situation we have, especially in the young country in South Sudan, which was really endowed with very rich natural resources, oil and gas, but this aspired development could not take place because of the absence of peace and stability, because of the civil strifes. So it is very important. All the continental organizations, the African Union is working to have a strife-free continent. The regional organizations, ECOWAS or IGAD from West also, SADC, these regional organizations and also the continental organization, African Union, including the United Nations, international community, is working hard, hand in hand, in order to make Africa stable, peaceful, and strife-free.
And with that, because you kept yourselves to time, I thank you very much indeed. I will thank you all for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, the President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency Paul Kagame, the President of Rwanda, His Excellency Dr. Mulatu Tesomi Vertu, the President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and to His Highness for joining us. We thank you very much indeed. And we'll just